Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the newest edition of St. Francis College Career Spotlight. My name is Christopher Hughes. I am Associate Director of Career Development at St. Francis College. We have a wonderful event today that we're really looking forward to, that the Career Center is working with in co-sponsorship with the Women's Leadership Network. The panel discussion today is Women in Government and Nonprofits. We have some wonderful individuals who are here to provide pertinent knowledge and wisdom about their careers in working for the greater good. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our distinguished president of St. Francis College, Dr. Miguel Martinez-Saenz.
Good thing that they didn't call me the Honorable, right? Roxanne Persaud. That's the only honorable one here is Roxanne Persaud. You know I got to do that. Yes, it is. Hey, so I just want to welcome everybody. And really what I want to say is thank you for folks taking the time to share your story, because I think it's incredibly important. Sandra, appreciate your leadership on this front. And one of the things I always tell young people, sometimes some of you hear me say this, I always talk about we got to make a living. So I want to be very clear, right? People need to get paid, right? Because we got to pay the bills. Everybody's got to pay the bills. But there is a way to think about how to craft a life where you get paid and you give back, right? One of the things that our patron saint says is it's in giving that we receive. And I think sometimes we forget the powerful work of people in government. Why? Because the media is demonizing those caricatures, sometimes not so much a caricature of people that have devoted themselves to public service. They also don't really pay attention to the incredible work that is the incredible fabric to the development, social, but also economic development of our communities, which are the role of nonprofits in our communities. And folks decide to take that work on as a labor of love. They could make more money on Wall Street, but they decide fundamentally to move in spaces where they're making a difference in the lives of people. So with that, I want to turn it back over. And I want to say again, thank you to the folks who are taking time to share. I will be disappearing from the screen, but I will be listening closely and taking notes. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, President Miguel. Right now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, who's a wonderful friend of the college, who's a driving force behind the Women's Leadership Network, Sandra Thomas. Sandra brings a lot of years of experience to her particular field. She's currently the interim co-executive director, that's a big title, of Open House New York, whose mission it is to provide broad audiences with unparalleled access to the extraordinary architecture that is the beauty of New York, and to the people who help design, build, and preserve the city. Without further ado, Sandra.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction, and thank you for the stellar Miguel for your kind words, and also for setting us up on the right foot. Before we get started and before I introduce these amazing panelists we have today, I want to tell you a little bit about WLN, which is the Women's Leadership Network at St. Francis, where I am fortunate enough to be an alumni as an honorary doctoral candidate. So I was very, very proud to receive that from the college. So that makes me an honorary alumni, technically. And to tell you a little bit about the Women's Leadership Network, what we are is dedicated to the mission of St. Francis College. We heard a little bit about our patron saint, and we're dedicated to act as a bridge builder between the academic experiences students, primarily women, receive in the professional world. So that's really our mission, and our purpose is to empower women to achieve their career goals by creating dynamic opportunities for students and young alumni that inspires confidence, aids connection building, and improving skills demanded of successful leaders of today, following the academic school year calendar. So that's who we are. Now let's find out who our panelists are today as we talk about nonprofit and government roles, something that it's really important to me as I spent most of my career on the corporate sector, but working primarily with nonprofit and governmental organizations, and have been a nonprofit leader for many, many years. So I'm going to start in a sort of particular order, but not really, introducing the Honorable Roxanne Persaud, who is our New York State Senator is a longtime advocate for the community. She was elected to the state Senate in November of 2015 after serving in the state assembly. She has been reelected twice, currently serves as the chair of the Social Services Committee, as well as a member of the Banks, Children and Families Commerce, Economic Development and Small Business, Labor and Transportation Committees. That is a lot. That's a lot, okay? I love it. Roxanne also spent many years as a higher education administrator prior to being elected to the state legislature. In addition, she served as president of the 69th Precinct Community Council in Canarsie, a member of Community Board 18 and commission of the New York City Districting Commission. A lot of commissions, a lot of commissioning. I love it. Next, I would like to introduce Ashley Futrell, is an assistant United States Senator in the Criminal Division of the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio. That's a mouthful. Where she investigates and prosecutes federal crimes. She previously served as an assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's office, where she investigated and prosecuted state crimes in New York City. Welcome, Ashley. Lizzie Persaud is the Director of External Relations at Rethink Food, a nonprofit organization with the mission to create a sustainable and equitable food system. Peralta previously served as the Executive Director of the National Supermarket Association, where she served to protect the interest of over 400 supermarket owners in the tri-state area. Go you. There she helped establish White House contact, passed bills to help the most vulnerable New Yorkers, and even was nominated and selected at City and State Power 100 list. 30 under 30? Just asking a question. Then we have Briana Mangano. Briana Mangano is project coordinator for the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. Be careful, everybody. She has served in city government for 3.5 years. She is a proud, I added that part because I'm sure you are, graduate of St. Francis College with a bachelor's degree in psychology, a degree that is absolutely needed in the line of work that you're in. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this. I hope that this is just the beginning of your involvement with the Women's Leadership Network. It is a phenomenal group of women who have come together, as I said before, to really act as bridge builders from the students to the alumnus. So welcome. So I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions, and please feel free to just answer. I'll direct it to some of you. Others will just go with the flow. So the first question is, and I'm going to direct this to Briana, what leads someone to nonprofit and government roles? Like what made you go down that path?
Hi, Sandra, and hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So that's a great question. So what led me to my personal path in city government is that I was very interested in getting involved with the city of New York. I always wanted to know operationally how it worked. I started to figure out that there was a lot of city agencies and a lot of opportunity and a lot of ways to get involved. So I started off working with the NYPD Police Department as a civilian, and I worked in the domestic violence unit. And from there, I really connected with the community, and I learned a lot about underserved communities and resources that were available. And I got to connect with vulnerable people, which really taught me a lot about life. And aside from that, it also taught me a lot about this city as a whole. And then I moved on to Department of Consumer Affairs, and that's located in Lower Manhattan. And from there, I started to learn about how that department serves, the businesses of New York City in part in giving them a license. So I've been heavily involved with the operations there. It's been great so far, and I've had a lot of opportunity to learn from my supervisors, managers, also from external agencies. I liaise with them every single day, and that's been great. So I've been learning a lot from everybody. It's been a great experience so far.
That's fantastic. I think in fact what happens is you learn words like liaise when you're doing this kind of work, because there's
Absolutely.
a lot of that come out of it. I mean, one of the things I notice is that the four of you one of the things you have in common is that you touch the community in many ways. So I'm wondering, Senator, if you think there's a certain kind of personality type that lands in these kind of roles. I mean, whether you're working in the government with consumer affairs, or you're working with a nonprofit that's focused on food justice, or whether you're dealing with the communities throughout the state, as well as your own communities in the city, or whether you're working with the law enforcement. Do you think there's a certain personality types that generally lead people there?
Well, thank you, Sandra, for that. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon to all of the students. The personality type, as I tend to tell people, it's the person who wants to be a workaholic, because there is no rest when you're trying to make the lives of the underserved better. And that's what everyone who's in nonprofit and who's in government aspires to do, to make the lives of those people better. So you have to give it your all. You have to be willing to work and not just walk around and say, I have a title and that's it. You have, you know, if you want to make progress, you have to put in the legwork. Getting people currently during this pandemic, food insecurity. All of the nonprofits are working with us because food insecurity is real. People who were not experiencing food insecurity prior to the pandemic are part of it now. And then there's this pride that, you know, that they don't want to come to pantries and all of these things. And so we have to work with the nonprofits to get them over that obstacle. So you have to be willing to touch the lives of people in a meaningful way. You have to want to do it. You want that to make them better.
Very good. For some reason, we lost your sound. Not sure why, but let's see if we can get it back.
Hello?
Yeah, we lost your sound for a second there, but now it seems like we have you. Can you see me, or have I frozen?
No, I see everyone. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to jump over to Ashley and sort of pose the same question, because you're in a different aspect of the governmental role. What are your thoughts? I mean, do you think there's a certain personality type that leads to what I consider public service, whether you're on the nonprofit side or governmental side?
No, I think it depends. So my path has been a little different because I consider myself, I had a career before law school, and then I have a career now as an attorney. And before law school, I worked in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. And I would say that there were so many people that I worked with in that form of public service that they were all just so interested in helping their communities. I love the fact that so many of us came from all over the country. Washington, D.C., you know, when you find a true native Washingtonian, that's something special, because you tend to see so many transplants coming into D.C. So I think that Capitol Hill had a particular personality type. I would say that they were definitely people who were highly motivated, very ambitious, very interested in serving their communities. And that part was definitely contagious. But I would definitely say as an attorney, it's a little different now. As an assistant United States attorney in Ohio, and just, you know, having practiced specifically prosecution at the state and federal level, I will say that it's interesting, because I think that, you know, as an attorney, you know, you would have gone through law school, and obviously, you know, you have your bachelor's as well. And like me, I have a master's. So many of us are coming in knowing that, look, we're not coming into this industry to make a ton of money, especially as a prosecutor, and a state and federal prosecutor. But there's obviously something else that drives us. Well, it's funny, when I just heard the senator speaking a moment ago, it made me think that I would say, when you work in public service, you define success differently. And I think that, you know, one of the things I've observed about my career, again, whether it was in the policy world or what I do now, is that success is not measured in the same way that it often is in the private sector. Oftentimes, when you're working on policy issues and you're trying to get a piece of legislation passed, that takes a long time. And sometimes you may not even see the fruits of your labor, but it may be the organizing. It may be the idea of getting a piece of legislation introduced, having a coalition built around that piece of legislation. And now there's no way that I can measure success in terms of wins and losses in the courtroom, because I'm wise enough and I'm empathetic enough to understand that the consequence of some of the actions of people is that their families are affected, the community is affected. So I think that, you know, when you work in public service, your measure of success, your, you know, there's just no, the wins and loss column is just not as defined as it may be in other jobs. And so you have to find those rewards and that encouragement and that motivation in your own way. And I think that's what keeps you going, when you can find that inner peace.
Thank you very much. So that also speaks to the personalities and what may get people to stay connected to their jobs, or what inspires them to do their jobs. I want to ask Lizzie, what skills do you think you need to have to get into the nonprofit sector?
Yeah,
Lizzie?
so I also wanted just to touch upon, I graduated from St. Francis in 2015, and I think that one of the greatest gifts that I got by being a terrier was the opportunity to learn exactly what President Miguel and Senator Persaud give what you've received. To be quite honest, I never thought I would be someone who would work in public office, because I grew up so poor that my goal in life was to make money. And when I lost my mom while I was a student at St. Francis, I had this really great, just not great, but I had this experience where all I could do was reflect on what I wished I could have done for my mom before she passed away. And so it gave me this heart of gold, of like strength and gold. And also just, I had so many people like Senator Persaud to follow. And so I think that the like skills that you don't need anything except for openness, right? Like I think a lot of time people think you need to be A, B, or C, but I think that in government and in politics and in nonprofits, you need to be open and you need to listen, and link people to the resources that they need, because ultimately you're a public servant, you are not an icon. And so that's what I think that is beautiful about nonprofits and government. And so yeah, openness, creativity is always really great. A lot of people think that you have to stay inside of a box, but the beauty is that you can be creative, you can bridge different stories to make a point. And yeah, I think those are some of the greatest qualities. And I just wanted to add that even in a world where I don't get to talk to Senator Persaud every day, I actually talk about her because we're pushing the same food bill to help people. And so it doesn't matter where we are, somehow we're always connected, and you have to keep that open. And so yeah,
That was a great answer. Thank you very much. I just want to mention to the audience that feel free to post messages in the chat so that we can, questions in the chat so we can ask at the end. Okay, we'll have some time for a Q&A. I want to come back to the senator. Something that I thought about is, as I was preparing for this, is, you know, politics has gotten a bad rap of late, while at the same time, we see an unprecedented number of young people throwing their hats into the ring. How does someone who is interested in the role of government stay encouraged and positive about going down that path? I mean, you mentioned about being a caring person, you mentioned about hard work, but why do we see this happening now, and how does someone stay positive?
I think you're seeing younger and younger folks attempting to go into politics because they thought that they were left out of conversations. And so they have stepped up and said, we must be included. And for the most part, they were left out of conversations. And you know why they were left out of conversations? Because they didn't want to become active participants in their communities. And so when you're not an active participant in your communities, things are going to pass you by. And so that's why you're seeing people stepping up and saying, I want to change the world. You know, I want to change the world. And we say, okay, but how are you going to do that? And so we're having the conversations with them. We're encouraging them to, you know, we've changed many pieces of legislation to encourage younger people to participate. For example, you know, you can become part of the community boards now at the age of 16. You know, you can start doing that. You can be part of your precinct council. You can be part of, you know, some of the boards that the city has, you know, not as a voting member, but as a member of that board and as on the advisory board. And so more and more young people are stepping up. You know, Elizabeth, I know Sandra called you Lizzie, but you know, Elizabeth, sorry, talks about, you know, the things that we're working on, because those are the food insecurity legislation and all of that. Young people want to get that done. And that's why they're all coming forward and walking the streets and having a conversation about it. They're also saying they're starting in schools. Last year, a couple of years ago, when the students decided that, they were going to revolt and they're going to walk out of schools because they felt they were not being heard. And across the nation, students started to rise up. And you know what? It was about time it happened. It was about time that our political system accepted the voices of the younger people.
Mhm, mhm. That's fantastic. Thank you. Well, I will call her Elizabeth from now on. But I did hear everything else you were saying. So Briana, let me ask you something. What has it been like working for Consumer Affairs? You spoke a little bit about that, but I want to just jump off on something else related to it. What kinds of people find themselves there? I know you kind of gave us a snapshot of how you ended up there, but what do you think was the driving force behind you getting that particular job?
That's a great question. So my experience so far has been great, specifically because I work with employees of all levels up to the commissioner. And it gives everybody a chance to do that. We're a very small agency, about 400 people. So coming from a larger agency previous to this, I see that it's progressed for me because, like I just said, you get to work with everybody from all different levels. And it's very diversified. So I would say that, like on my floor specifically, well, when I was in the office, not during COVID, I'm on the commissioner's floor. So for example, that whole side of the wing is all lawyers. So I got to learn a lot about lawyers and what they do every day. And then there's my side of the wing, which is finance and administration, which is basically the backbone of the entire agency because it's administration. So I feel that it's given me an opportunity to really learn about, management or operations, anything that you would want to know, you can, because everybody's willing to teach at the agency. So, and it's also a lot of room to grow at the agency. It's very possible, like the senator said, if you're willing to put the work in and you want to learn, it's a perfect role for any, like young aspiring employee, or if you're late in your career and you want to switch, it's great for anybody.
That's great. That's good promotion. Ashley, so that begs me to ask you this question. You mentioned that you had another career before you went to law school. So the first question is, how did your undergraduate career prepare you for the job you now hold? And what was the work that you did before you went to law school?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So when I moved from Ohio to Washington, D.C. for college to attend American University, I was very passionate about wanting to work on Capitol Hill, wanting to work in government affairs. So my career before law school, as I mentioned before, was working in Congress, working for the United States Senate, and then working for a couple of different members of Congress. And I also worked for a few nonprofits after that in advocacy work and government affairs work as well. I attended Howard University School of Law after working for about 7 years in government affairs. And I felt like part of the reason I even went to Howard for law school was because of the history of being actually Charles Hamilton Houston had a quote. He said, a lawyer is either a parasite on society or a social engineer. And he went on to say that a social engineer is a person who knows how to use the Constitution in a way that will essentially benefit their community. And that's what I aspired to be. That's why I was attracted to Howard University for law school. It was an incredible experience. And somewhere in my first year of law school, I came in thinking I was going to be this corporate attorney and maybe pay back some loans for the previous degrees that I had. And I remember being in criminal law class, and my professor assigned us all roles in the mock trial, and I did a particular opening statement, and she talked to me about possibly looking at being a trial attorney as a career path, which was totally different than what I envisioned for myself when I entered law school. And when I thought about it, I looked around me at Howard, and there were so many of my classmates who were going to be incredible defense attorneys. I mean, incredible. They were going to be zealous advocates on behalf of their clients. There was no doubt. But when I thought about it, I realized that there were so few people like me on the prosecution side. There were so few people, excuse me, who had the resources of the government, who had the discretion to go in and affect change from the inside in that way. So that's what actually led me to going to the Manhattan DA's office, moving to New York. I'm still a member of the New York Bar, and actually practicing. It was difficult. I mean, I have to say, you know, every day was not an easy day at all, especially when you have empathy and when you understand what it's like to not come from much, and when it's like to talk to people and prosecute cases when you know that you don't know the full story of a person's background, but you try to learn anyway. In my current role as an assistant United States attorney, it's not a role that you can get directly out of law school. It's very, very, very rare, if ever. Usually, if a person comes out of law school into the U.S. Attorney's Office, that means they were in the Department of Justice's honors program. But typically, it's more of a lateral position for people who have been practicing law either in a major law firm or a mid-sized law firm, or possibly as a prosecutor at the county or state level. So in this role now, it's one where I, to be quite frank, I never thought my path would lead me back home, which is exactly where I am now. But I will say that it attracts a person who is interested again in affecting change on some level. But I will say that the more that, it's not always about being, I had a former boss who said, in terms of prosecutors and law enforcement officers, we need to be collegial, but not cozy. And that is something that I take to heart every day, because it is not my job to please police officers and law enforcement. It's my job to make sure that justice is being served, and to question every stop, to question every search warrant, every affidavit, every piece of evidence, so that we can ensure that justice is done. Because I'm a prosecutor for not just the city or the country or whoever's behind me, but also the defendant as well, and everyone else who's in that courtroom. So those are just some of the qualities that I think are important, integrity, honesty, and just, ensuring that at the end of the day, you can sleep at night knowing that on your watch, the person that you're prosecuting had a fair trial or a fair day in court.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I think that it is a huge undertaking. And I think, your journey is really, really a good example of how you can pivot, but sort of stay in the same type of environment, which is it comes back to what you said before, which is about service and community. So thank you. So Elizabeth, my question to you is, sort of pivoting off of what Ashley just said, talk about your first job when graduation, and how that led you, how you got into the nonprofit sector. You talked a little bit about it, but there's certainly different ways to go in terms of service or things that you want to do to help and make a difference in people's lives, but you chose the nonprofit sector. But I wanted specifically how you got that first job.
Yeah, so to be quite honest, I never thought I would do nonprofits. I thought my plan, I had a really great professor at St. Francis. Her name was Sarah Haviland, or Dr. Razudovich, and she always made me fall in love with history and the knowledge of the class. So I thought I was going to do a PhD. My dream was to be at Princeton and maybe work at a museum one day. And after my mom passed away, I had this huge desire to know more about the world outside of New York. And it just so happened that I was selected to, upon graduating, go to the African American Museum and work there before it opened. And while I was there, first of all, it's always beautiful to be part of one of the greatest tributes to Black history. And that just was beautiful to me, to be around like Lonnie Bunch, Obama, just celebrating life. But what it did leave me, because of the way that I was raised and the education I received, which is give back what you received, I had this moment where I kept saying, this is so beautiful, but I want it for New York. And so I had to face this decision, which was I could have stayed and probably been a founding team member at the African American Museum. But in my heart, I kept saying, but I wish I could give this to my mom, if she was still alive, in New York. So I quit, like I left, and it was the greatest experience ever because I had to struggle. I worked at museums. I worked at the New York Historical, the Intrepid, the American Folk Art Museum, so many places. And I ended up working back in education. And I worked at a school where I was just supposed to be the director of admissions and marketing. And I was like, no, 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 no. I want to do more. I want to teach. And I taught a civics course. I created partnerships. And it's exactly the same thing that both Ashley and Senator Persaud and everyone has been saying. It's because if you care about your community, you're a workaholic. So when I turned my computer off at 5, I would rock the streets and say what was going on. And so I think that what became clear to me, because to be honest, the big fear I had was, if I work in nonprofits, am I going to be able to support my family? Because I'm the bread earner for my whole family. And so what I discovered, and I love this, you can finesse it. You can work in nonprofits and you can still make good money and make a difference. It's just a matter of being truly honest with your heart and what you want to do. And so for me, I was a great position, executive director of the National Supermarket Association. But one of the reasons that I stepped down was because, as Senator Persaud said, my personal mission is that people are hungry. And I don't care what my title was. I will take a title drop if it means that I get to contribute to a society where there's a good for someone that doesn't necessarily have to be me, but someone else who needs it. And so, yeah, I think that whatever you decide to do, you can change your path, whether you're 26 or 46, because the beauty of a nonprofit or a government job is that it's about your heart and what you care about your community. And like we said before, empathy and understanding. So, yeah.
You sound like somebody who's going to run for office one day. I'm just saying.
That's what a lot of people tell me.
26 to 46? Yeah. So that was a good one. I like that one. You're teeing yourself up. But I will say, people will say that to you, but before you do it, you ask them why they think you should do it. Okay? Just make sure you ask them why, because they'll say you should do it. Ask them why. And I know that from experience. I'm glad you mentioned that part about the money, because I think that's one of the misconceptions or realities, but I'd like for you to all to speak to this idea of being able to support yourself in the nonprofit sector and or government sector. Briana, you want to jump in and just share your thoughts about that? Curious to know what you think.
Sure. So I definitely think it's possible. I mean, you know, if you're smart with your money, I mean, I've learned to be smart with my money. And, you know, like I said before, there's always room to grow. But as Elizabeth just said, which really stuck out to me, is that if your heart is in it, then for me, it won't feel like a job. So say you wanted to move up and make more money, and you know you weren't really happy with that, you have a chance to drop down and love something and still make that money. So I feel like there's an opportunity, you know, for your expenses, to be happy, for the whole nine for me.
Okay. Senator, I know you said it takes passion, a workaholic, but you still have to pay the bills and you still have to, you know, dream and maybe do something different down the line. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that I mean, it's clear you've been doing this for a long time, that it's worth it? I guess that's really my question.
For me, it is worth it. You know, when I was first asked to run for the state assembly, and I looked at it and there was no money. And I said, okay, I still have a mortgage to pay and I still had a car note and all of these things at a time. And I said, but I spoke with my mom, my dad, my brother, with my sister, and we had that conversation. You have to have a support team with, you know, before you step out. And then you have to be really committed to doing it. Don't go out there and say, oh, everybody's telling me I'm the greatest, I should do it, and do it. And then you're just going to be miserable if that's the reason you're doing it, because others are telling you. And so I decided, and then also I thought about it, and I was doing all of the things in the community. And so I had a base already, you know, and so I spoke about it, tried to make sure my finances were going to be fine and everything. And then also what motivated me also was I looked at it. I was being given an opportunity that many people who look like me are not going to be given.
Mm-hmm.
An opportunity as an immigrant, an opportunity as a woman, and an opportunity as a woman of color.
Mm-hmm.
I weighed all of that and I said, okay, I can take the pay cut and I can get by because I'm going to make sure girls in my community can aspire to be in this role.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not just only about the money, it's about everything else that comes with it.
Yeah.
And I did that, you know, and I have never regretted it. So much so that, you know, the Senate seat became available just right after I became the assembly member, and I ran for that. When I won the assembly seat, I was the first woman and then also the first person of color to represent the district ever.
Wow.
Right? So I know I knew what my mission was after that, and I stopped thinking about the money.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to get by, and I knew my lot now became, how do I improve the lives of the people across the district? So it's not, ladies, it's not only about the money. Going in nonprofit and in government, you're not going to become wealthy. And people tend to think elected officials that you have this unlimited budget to spend any way you see. That's absolutely not the case. You know, a lot of the things that we have to do, we have to look into our own pockets to get it done, or partner with someone to get it done. So it's not only about the money.
I'm so glad you said that and spoke specifically about the fact that you are an immigrant, because I do think, and I certainly understanding the St. Francis population, that there's often this difficulty or challenge or pushback for people from immigrant communities or first generation Americans to go into businesses that appear are going to be much more successful because you're going to be able to so, you know, there's an encouragement, or more than encouragement in many cases, a push to go into fields that are going to create abundance, right? And so I'm so glad that you mentioned the importance of going into the nonprofit or government sector, because you are representing the representation, which is so important to have representation. And that will trump money in many ways. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's important for people to hear, because I know that it's often difficult, especially for immigrants. They hear you need to get a job that's going to be a given, right? It's going to be a given. And I also appreciate the fact that you were straightforward in illuminating about the reality of elected officials and the money, because many elected officials make less than the average nonprofit executive director. Actually, if you're running the Red Cross, you're probably making tons of money. So I think I really appreciate that. I want to just ask a couple of nuts and bolts questions, and then there's a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is, and I'm going to start with you, Ashley. You spoke a little bit about this, but what courses do you think a person would need, and this is not even based on your experience, but in general, to become an ADA, to prepare for law school, whichever one you want to focus on?
Sure, and thank you for that. I first want to touch on that last question, because I appreciate the senator's thoughts. I really do. There's just a couple things that I think we have to just be very clear about. First is that there is something called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program through the Department of Education. So if you have federal loans, they can be forgiven after 10 years of qualified payments. They also have the income-driven repayment program, which again, they calculate your monthly student loan payment, if you have them, if you're like me and you have them, based on your income. That is very, very important. But what you have to do is you have to have your employer sign certain employment certifications every year to show that you actually work in this particular place. That's extremely important. I know people who have benefited from it, who have worked for 10 years and have all of their federal loans forgiven. If you're someone like me, if you're a lawyer, that means you have 2 degrees. So that means that if you took out federal student loans, that's a way for your loans to be forgiven. I bring that up because when I lived in New York City, a big source of a big issue, honestly, was paying student loans. I mean, it's a reality for our generation. So we can, get as excited as we want to about serving our community, but the federal government would like their money at some point as well. So I think that you have to have a plan. I think that it's well and good to want to pursue public service, and I think there's ways to support ourselves, but we have to have a plan, and you should know that before you leave college, so that if you decide that you want to go into public service, that you know exactly some of the tips and tools that are out there so that you can support yourself. I just had to, there could not leave this.
That's a reality check.
That. Also, the other thing is that you have to negotiate and ask for what you want. I think that sometimes working in public service, we just assume the salary is going to be low. So we don't even challenge, or we don't present counter offers. I'm not saying that, look, I think you should do your research. You should have an idea of how much a person generally makes in that position. But as women especially, we cannot be afraid of asking for what we believe our value is, okay? I have been in positions where I have seen attorneys who are actually, and they're in the private sector, where maybe their health insurance isn't covered, or maybe, they have, their salary is so low and they're so afraid of even asking the question. And I think that we have to remind ourselves, so many of us are so fortunate to be in these positions. They're competitive, I get that. But a person will respect you when you ask for what you're worth and your value. Within reason, again, do your research. But I think that's really important, especially to the extent that there are women that are listening. So many of us have trouble, with salary negotiations. We're afraid to ask that question. We have to, not even just for us, but for the women that are coming afterwards. So of course I forgot, the second part of your question.
That's okay. I like what you said.
Perfect.
Don't worry about it. I think that was very important. That was absolutely a reality check. In terms of what direction people choose to go in, I think it's always important to have a plan, but also do research around the roles and the salary. So I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Yes, I think you asked about the
courses.
The courses, right?
About the courses.
Right. There's a misconception that to be an attorney that you have to be either a pre-law major or a political science major or something of that sort. Nothing could be further from the truth. I had classmates at Howard who were finance majors, business majors, English majors, even drama, dance, and theater majors. And they went on to have very successful careers in the law. So I personally think that an English major or someone who is adept at writing would be very, very good in terms of any area of law, because there is so much writing that's involved. But there's other things like sociology, psychology. Oh my goodness. I would love to see future attorneys who have backgrounds in those fields. There's nothing wrong with the law and social thought or law and society. In fact, law and society was my major. It was an interdisciplinary major encompassing political science and criminal justice. But I think the point is that, yes, there are some hard skills like, having trial advocacy skills, public speaking, writing. But in order to enter law school and to be successful, just understand that it's not necessarily, in my opinion, the major, but it's what you're getting out of it. And I'm a big advocate for working before you decide to go to law school. So to the extent that there are any of you who want to be attorneys in the public service space, I think that you add to your credibility when you have real world experiences.
Yeah, that was good. Well, let me ask a couple of questions then on a different note. In terms of just sort of the path, I wanted to ask Elizabeth, what you imagine you may do next? Besides run for office, I mean.
Well, yeah, so to be honest, I think that in the future, I will definitely run for office. And it's just because I care about my community, but I also have had the great opportunity to see people like Senator Persaud. And one thing that I learned from her, from Rob Oliva, from Ruben, the people who are pillars in my experience at St. Francis is, she just said it earlier, you need to be on the ground and you need to build a base before you can ever say, I'm gonna help you. So I think that the way that I see my career going in the next 3 to 5 years is sticking to places that actively help people. And that's the most important thing for me. And to be quite honest, I actually literally was having dinner with someone last night and talking about how I could be a more active member in my community board, because I know how to help people. Like this last week, what I saw myself doing was going to my neighbors and asking them if they checked their rental records to make sure that they're not being overcharged for their rent. And so for me, my whole thing is that whatever I do is just going to be being an effective member of the community, whether that's in my day job or if that's in my day job and my night job. And more importantly, I see myself being even more involved at St. Francis. And that is because my time at St. Francis taught me I was a student government president, which gave me the opportunity to meet Eric Adams, Diana Reyna, Diana Reyna is still such a great mentor to me to this day. And so I know that you didn't ask me this, but one, I wanted to say that please take great courses at St. Francis because they teach you about the world in a different perspective. And the other thing is that when I met Senator Persaud in college, I remember going to her office about something that I needed help financially. And I turned that one conversation into, can I talk to you again tomorrow? And that's what I think people need to focus on, networking, because you don't know everything. And you can have guides that will guide you through life that will make things a lot easier. And especially as a woman of color, I will say that unfortunately, a lot of doors were closed for me. But when I tapped into my allyship, my mentors, they helped me tackle down and open those doors. And I think that's the most important thing we have to learn here. Together, we're stronger.
Oh, there's another tagline. Together, we're stronger. Oh, yes. Make sure you have my contact information. Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Briana, I just wanted to ask you the same question, and then we're going to go to some questions from the chat. What do you think is next?
Sure. So I definitely want to be more involved with the community. So I'm in the process of figuring out how I could do that a little bit more. And I'm actually in the process of kind of maybe changing my career path and going back to school. So I'm being very patient with it. I'm not in a rush. As Ashley said, it actually spoke to me a lot. Being a panelist, it's actually supposed to be for everybody else, but I actually took that very seriously, that you should work before you do anything to get real world experience. There's no rush for anything. I believe in just working hard, trying your best. I've had a lot of failures. A lot of doors were shut for me because I was a woman. Unfortunately, that still exists in the workplace. And I feel that it's just get back up and try again. And, if you have a degree and you do want to switch, there's nothing wrong with that. Go for it. Do anything your heart tells you to do. Anything is possible if you put your mind to it and your heart is in it, because you will accomplish anything that you put your mind to.
Great, thank you. So here's one of the questions from the audience. This is a basic question, and Senator, you might be able to help with this. How do you become a community board member? I tried and no one was helping in the process in becoming a member.
Okay, first you go to the community board. You start attending the meeting so that people get to know that you're there, and you get to know who the manager is, the chair, and some of the other members. And you speak with them and you express your interest. And then you go to your city council member and speak with a city council member about your interest in being appointed to that board. You also can contact the borough president's office about being a borough president's appointee. So it's not the board, the community board is not as a board that you can walk up to the chair and say, I'm interested in being on the board. It's an application process. And then you have to have recommendations and all of that. But if you've been participating in the meetings, people will know who you are. And so if you go to the borough president and says, well, have you been attending the meetings? He said, well, no, I just heard about it and I really want to be on the board. Well, they're going to look at the people who applied who have been attending that board. And some people have been attending that board, the meetings, for many, many years and doing work with the board, not as a member. but as a community participant. So the information for applying for the board is on NewYorkCity.gov's page, the CAU's page, and you can just, again, go to the community board meeting, have a conversation, just see what's going on, and then reach out first to your city council member. And I hope everybody who's on knows who their city council member is.
Yes.
Oh, so.
Hello. Yeah. I mean, I think that what you just said is so important. There are no shortcuts to any of these career paths. There are no shortcuts. You have to do the work that it takes to get noticed, to get your voice out there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And I
And
just want to touch on something Ashley had said, when she said you have to have a plan. Yeah, you have to definitely have a plan in anything that you're doing in life. And that's what I said when I said, when I was asked, I made sure I checked to make sure, can I do it? And I had the conversations with the people in my life who matter, whose opinions carry the weight for me to do anything. And so everyone has to do that. And then you move forward and say, okay, we can do this, because then it becomes us doing it, not just me doing it. It's us, because you have to have your village behind you for you to succeed.
absolutely. I'm just going to ask this last question and I'm going to get ready to wrap up. The question is, for those working in the nonprofit sector, is there something that isn't obvious that those of us who volunteer or intern in the nonprofit sector can do to make things easier for the organizations we volunteer with? I'm not 100% sure I understand that question. If anybody does, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So one thing I will say about nonprofits is that they're crazy. And it's because they have to be nimble because they're for the people. But people, the big companies of the world want to use them to make themselves look great for all the bad things that they might do. And that doesn't mean that those companies are bad. It just means that nonprofits are forced to be almost like a glass of water, fit into any container. And so, because you have to understand that the idea is the mission and the mission is the people. And so what I would say is that if you're going to volunteer or intern at a nonprofit, one, make sure you know what the nonprofit is. Read every article that you can. Read about the good and the bad and the ugly, because you need to be aware that unfortunately, because nonprofits are so nimble, sometimes it's just imperfect, and that's okay. Does that mean that if you see bad things happening, you shouldn't leave? No, I'm not saying stay in a bad place, but I'm just saying have a little bit of patience, because nonprofits are almost like startups that have no funding, right? Startups get investors. Nonprofits have to literally beg every person possible to give them money to be successful. And so, yeah, I would say just be patient. And at the end of the day, be curious. Just ask questions. Say, can I help you? Like, hey, I noticed that you're super swamped and I know that this is my task, but is there a way that I can help you that will help you prioritize your duties? Because at the end of the day, what happens in nonprofits is that everybody, just like politicians, they wear multiple hats. So if you can be that person that says, you know what, I'll take on your schedule this week. I think that you take on their schedule and you get to meet every single person they're interacting with because you're in charge of their schedule. So I think that if you're going to volunteer or intern at a nonprofit, my suggestion is don't try to be like, I'm going to change the world. Try to be in there and listen and learn, because then you'll just find exactly where you're needed without having to stir the pot, essentially.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was a great wrap up to the questions. And I just want to say my takeaways are, you got to have a plan, certainly to work in anywhere, but certainly in the nonprofit or government sector, have a plan. You got to have your village, right? You've got to have your people. If you're going to run for office, or you're going to be working in government or working in the DA's office, or wherever it is, have your village. But also know your worth. I think that's huge. And I think as women, and for the most part, the Women's Leadership Network is encouraging young women to rise up, and knowing your worth, I think is very important. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I really, really appreciate your candor around all of that is really really good. I'm gonna ask one last question and just if you can give me a quick answer, it'd be great. What is one of the service projects that you've been involved with that really feels good to you? Ashley? You know, the one thing you did that we always tell stories and that you usually tell, just quickly.
Sure. The service project that I think was most helpful to me is all the work that I do in reentry. I serve on in a reentry team in which men and women who are coming back into society after being incarcerated are in need of services. And we help them, those formerly incarcerated people, to get jobs, housing, an ID or a license, and making sure that they have their social security card and the tools that they need to be successful when they re-enter society.
That's fantastic. Briana?
I would say, wait, can you just repeat it one more time? I want to make sure I answer correctly.
I want to know a service project that you've been involved with that you really are proud of.
Oh, sure. So I would say in my previous agency in the police department, when I worked with domestic violence victims, I worked with a program. It was with Safe Horizon. So that's a big note. They're a great organization, nonprofit. We served the community and we helped domestic violence victims along with their families get on their feet after they've either separated, which, mother and child, they needed housing, they needed food. We provided food stamps and, just going to schools and speaking to families at PTA meetings or, educating the community that there is help and resources available. And it was great.
Important work. Senator?
I have, for me, it's, DV, this weekend, actually, I'm doing a DV project. And Briana, we love to say domestic violence survivors. You want to empower them. And so working with the women and children and getting them on their feet and making sure that they're in a comfortable space and they're receiving all the resources that they should. I think that's one of the major projects that that I continue to work on. We've been doing it. Tom Flood there. I know I have to make sure I acknowledge Tom. Tom has helped us to have Christmas gifts so that we can give to the kids. And so I appreciate Tom doing it. He hasn't done it in a number of years, but he's done that. So Tom, that's like a little plug. You can do it this year. But it's always about helping those people get back on their feet and making sure that, they understand we're there to support them.
Terrific. And Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I've done. And I'll just say that since COVID, one of the things that just brought me so much joy was that when I heard that if you were married to an undocumented person, you were not going to receive the stimulus check, that hurt me because half my life, my mom was undocumented. So what I did was I created a pilot program called Let's Feed NYC that focused on feeding undocumented people of New York City. And I got companies to donate about 50,000 pounds of food. And then I worked with Lyft so that we could provide free rides and free food vouchers to elderly and senior citizens and autoimmune compromised individuals. And for me, that was beautiful because it was really just born out of a fear, right? Like, this happened to me. What would happen if I was still undocumented during this wave of COVID or this time? And so, yeah, that brought a lot of joy. And it's just beautiful to see what a meal simplifies in a person's day.
Very good. Thank you all so much for those thoughtful responses to all the questions. I really appreciate it. You might want to drop, if you're interested, in your email or contact information into the chat for anybody who might want to reach out to you, or if Elizabeth, you want to mention a couple of the organizations you are involved with. And I certainly think the reentry program is quite amazing too. I know it's in Ohio, right?
But there's so many opportunities.
There's so many, but I think just hearing about reentry is really important for people. So I want to thank you all for participating. I know that Christopher Hughes wants to come on and just say a goodbye and share something with you. But I thank you all really for your insight and candor and taking the time today. It's so important. I know everybody's sort of been excessively zoomed out but the fact that we could all connect to talk about these important topics and to help the students of St. Francis, I think is phenomenal. So I thank you very much.